So would you say that anyone would go against the understanding of her being a 9 years old is implicit information rather than...
I think it is, because you have to look at, this is a very interesting issue. Okay, this is a very interesting issue. Non-Muslims, from the life in the community of the Prophet in Medina, from his opponents in Mecca, to John of Damascus, died 749 in his polemics against Islam, to Matthew of Paris in the 1100s, to Voltaire, to Gibbon, to the Chanson de Roland, to anybody who wants to insult the Prophet. They had tons of information. They were looking for anything they could use to insult the Prophet. And his sex life was target numero uno. It's in the Quran, the issue of Zainab and Zayd. I mean, we have document during his own time, people said, you're committing incest because adopted children are like regular children. This is true in Near East, this is true in the Roman Empire, in Roman culture. And the Quran says, no, they're not. This was the biggest, if you look at the instances in which the Zayd-Zainab affair is mentioned by critics of the Prophet from his lifetime until 1900, you will run out of, check marks on the paper before you count the number of times this story is used by opponents of Islam. They also insult him for marrying Aisha. Why? Because he was so obsessed, he's so lustful. He's such an id-driven creature. I don't believe this, just in case someone is recording this. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just quoting the opinion of others. He's such an id-driven creature that he has this fantasy of Aisha, a dream about her, and he wants to marry her. No one ever mentions her age, ever, that I've found, until 1905. The British historian David Margoliouth has a book on the rise of Islam, the Prophet and Islam. And he mentions this, and he says it's an ill-advised union. For how else should we characterize the marriage between a man of 53 and a girl of 9? This is the first I've ever seen that anyone mentions this. Why is that? Why is that until the early 20th century, no one talks about this? When they are making stuff up about the Prophet to insult him, and they don't bring this up. Because they were all marrying underage girls too. I mean, you have to understand, the pre-modern, in fact, even today, peasant societies, to use the Marxist term, societies where you have the vast majority of people live in small agricultural communities, and agricultural work is the predominant form of livelihood. Marriage is very early, especially for women, generally right after puberty. And as I tell my students, yeah, Gandhi got married very young. Because you have to remember, and I've said this before in other lectures, and I think it's very important, our notions of what you're supposed to do in life are based on our lifestyle. If you don't have high school and college, or whatever, college and university and medical school, and you have to go get a job, if you're just living in the desert and you're tending goats all day, and you're a boy and you go through puberty, and being a boy, male who's gone through puberty, I can tell you, speak for the rest of the men out there, basically 99.9% of your brain at that point is occupied with sex. And I don't know what the percentage is with women, but I assume that women at some point start getting interested in sex too. And you're sitting out there with goats, and you've got nothing to do. You have no hope in your life of ever doing anything except tending goats. Why in God's name would you not get married? It makes no sense. Of course you should. And they're like, oh, but you're not emotionally mature. What? What is emotional mature? What does that mean, emotionally mature? This guy doesn't know what emotionally mature is. He doesn't, people don't think about that. Well, what about, power dynamic in the relationship? What? Power dynamic in the relationship? This is all completely anachronistic concepts that we're imposing on the past or on societies that justifiably maybe don't care about this. So the argument, no one mentioned this because it wasn't a concern.